we had that conversation with the state police, and we worked with our local department, and we brought the state police in. They opened up a barracks, which is still in the township of Irvington. And we did some innovative programs like Ceasefire, which we hired what we call community interrupters to work with elements in the community who were challenged by a number of issues. And so you can't just police your way out of the problems of crime. You also have to address the underlying social issues would impact residents of the township. We got the community engaged, and so we got a better handle on it. But now we see, though I'm not in office now, I do see some challenges cropping up, not only in Irvington, but around the country. We were also impacted by the larger city, Newark. We were really at the border. So you can be in Irvington on one side of the street, Newark on the other, east, and then we also touched the suburban area. So we had a very aggressive police director in Newark who kind of pushed crime our way, and I hired him. I ultimately ended up hiring him, who he was a crackjack crime fighter. He later went on to head up the state police, and then when in the city of Trenton, where he reduced crime in Trenton, which is the state's capital, and I hired him for our town. He's still working as a police analyst in the town, and major strategist in terms of how to reduce crime in urban centers.
So, one of the things that tends to happen is when we're electing politicians to lead cities, we think that they can fix all the issues and all the challenges, right? Mm-hmm. And we're like, hey, why can't they just do this? Can you speak to some of the barriers? Like, you have some power, you have more power than most people do, mm-hmm. as a mayor of a township, but you can't just snap your finger and make everything go away.
Right. So, people should look at, no matter what, whether you live in a large city or a small town or whatever, most cities are run by this thing called the city charter. And vested in that city charter is the powers of the mayor, powers of the city council, and they could vary. So in my particular form of government, I had what they call a strong executive form of government, where the mayor has certain detailed powers. He actually is responsible for the day-to-day. I'd served 6 years on the city council, so you're basically a legislator. You don't do the day-to-day operations of government. Now, you hire staff to carry out the various functions, but you really are the CEO of the organization. As I said, Irvington's budget at that time, it's much bigger now, but it was about $100 million at the time. And so you get a chance to hire some people directly. Some of your key staff you get to hire directly. You're responsible for working with your fiscal people in terms of balancing the budget. So in New Jersey, you're required to have a balanced budget. So that means you got to make the decisions of what you're going to fund, what you're going to cut, all those kinds of issues. And as I said, you pick key personnel. So you need to know what the powers are of the mayor. People think the mayor is responsible for the rain and the snow, but he's not. He can only do certain kinds of things, but he should do the things that he can do. And, there are also other things that impact your thing. So you may have state issues, that you may get certain funding from the state. That funding could increase. More cases than not, it decreases. So that means you may have to make some decisions around those particular issues. You may get money from the federal government. And so that could increase or decrease. They could have a particular focus. And sometimes it matches what your focus is and they fund it. And sometimes it doesn't. So those are the impacts. And then there's the political realities. So the mayor is the chief executive, but then you have the legislative branch of government. Anybody who studied social studies or local history or government or civics knows that there are always three branches of government. There's the executive, which I served in. I also served in the legislative branch. So more cases than not, the legislative branch of government is really responsible for the budget, just like Congress is responsible for the budget. So they can determine what programs get funded, what gets cut, because at the end of the day, they give you your overall budget. Now, you may be able to, because you have executive powers, be able to tinker and move some things on occasion based on the law. And then you have a judicial branch of government. So you run one branch. And people oftentimes forget these other areas of government impact what you have the ability to do or not do, and that's the state and federal, and sometimes there's even a county government where you're in a regional kind of scheme. So yeah, so and then you have to use the tools available. Sometimes you can influence the private sector to do things. So one of the things you have as a mayor is influence, and you use those influence for the benefit of your community. You try to grow the economy. You want your town to have certain things in certain places, so you try to influence that process through your influence as a personality, your influence as a government leader, your influence as a politician, and as a community leader. All those things impact what you're able to do.
But isn't it a little challenging, right? Because
extremely challenging.
So many different stakeholders that have different visions for what they want the community to stand for. So sometimes it's a little challenging to galvanize around one central vision. How did you try to incorporate all the different people's needs and wants during your tenure?
Yeah, so you try to
tired.
Yeah. Listen, you try to work on the things, so I always tell people, look for what a person says when they're running for office. Now, oftentimes people say anything to get elected. So if they're over ambitious, if they're telling you things that don't seem realistic or doable, then that might be a problem. But if they give you some realistic goals that they're trying to achieve and they're focused on some very particular things, because you're right, you can't do everything. But do the things that you tell people you're going to try to focus on. So, one of the things that we did, in addition to crime and trying to grow the economy, we focused a lot around youth issues. In our town, we don't run the Board of Education. However, you have some influences on what you can do through your recreation department, through different programs in the development of youth. So that was one of the initiatives we tried to do. We tried to bring a number of youth-oriented programs to the city, and we tried to be a business-focused community, because we know that government creates some jobs, but the largest growth of an economy is always small business. And if you can get some of the corporate community to expand or do things in your community, that happens as well. So, you have to focus on some core issues. The public is the ultimate judge and jury. They decide what they want you to have you do. And I mean, you have to, moderate, and you have to sell. So, one of the things that you have to sell your vision, and whatever those things that you want to accomplish, you have to get the public to buy into. You have to get your city council to buy into. You may have to get the state to buy into. You may have to get the federal government to buy into. So ultimately, you're always the chief cheerleader and chief marketer of your community to bring the kinds of things that you want to see happen in your community. And yes, it is difficult. It's not anybody that tells you it's easy. I don't know. Because it's not.
So another question that I have is, earlier you spoke about being also active in a lot of different groups around just galvanizing other mayors of other places in New Jersey and sometimes around the country. How did you feel that went? Did you gain insight into what other folks were doing?
Absolutely. So my engagement with the United States Conference of Mayors gave you kind of a national view. So they have a winter meeting, they have a summer meeting, and they have topics of conversation that mayors engage in. So you get a chance to see and hear ideas that come from around the country. Everything is not going to work in your neighborhood, but you might pick up ideas and contacts. And then when you go to those national meetings, you have people from the Congress. Sometimes the president shows up. Sometimes you're in a position to lobby and meet federal agencies that assist you with some grant funding for a particular project or whatever. And then on the state level, we had two organizations, three. I chaired the New Jersey Urban Mayors, and the New Jersey Urban Mayors were designed to help urban cities in New Jersey. They have distinct different needs from rural communities and maybe suburban communities. So that was a forum where you got mayors together to kind of use the weight of your populations because, we're the bulk of the population, and our issues are different. And a lot of times urban centers, even though you have rural and suburban neighborhoods, the urban centers are kind of where your transportation hubs. Sometimes they're your cultural hubs, where your museums and major libraries, your colleges and universities, maybe your county government is there. So we bear the brunt of some of the challenges for the whole area because we have to service a whole population. So our challenges are sort of unique and different from suburban and rural. So we caucus together. You work on legislation together that impacts cities. And again, the New Jersey Conference of Mayors is where we try to figure out what we have together as a common group of mayors that we can bring to the state agenda. And there's some things, look, there's no Republican or Democratic or urban or suburban or rural way to pick up snow or to keep the streets clean. So, those things we have in common. Everybody's always concerned about taxation. So we can maybe come together on some of those issues and see what works. So, those are kind of the things that gives you some leverage, and you're viewed as a leader in those organizations. You get the attention of the governor and the congressional delegations and so forth. So, having having had a leadership role is really an honor among your colleagues, as they respect your style or your style of leadership and your knowledge of how to move different programs and so forth and so on. So I had the distinct pleasure of having led a couple of those organizations as well.
Now, how did New York and Pennsylvania factor into New Jersey and what you were doing? Because you're in the middle of these two.
Well, sure. So we're squeezed in between both of those media markets, between the major Philadelphia media market and the New York City media market. So sometimes we have to kind of sell ourselves to those media markets to get attention. And number two, when I was the chief of staff for Mayor Mike Steele, when he was mayor, we actually worked on some significant issues with the late, great Mayor David Dinkins. So in 1990 to 94, the 90 census was a big thing. It actually helped me when I became mayor. We learned something because Mayor Dinkins got some mayors together to challenge the way the census was counted during that time. And the census determines whether or not what kind of resources you get delegated to your community. So he challenged the count, and we lost the case at that time because you can't challenge it after the count. It's very difficult to challenge after the count. So one of the things that happened to us in 2010 is that we found out one of our major housing complexes, probably one of the largest housing complexes in the area, is now called Maple Gardens. People hadn't got their census forms in the mail. And we kept getting calls to the mayor's office because we had some conscientious citizens who said, hey, we didn't get our forms. So we went over there and we started canvassing, talking to residents and so forth. Nobody had gotten their forms. So because of that experience in 1990, having worked in government, we were able to intervene in federal court on an emergent basis and say, hey, wait a minute. We're going to get an undercount here in our community because they missed this entire complex. And so the judge was very gracious. He intervened and ordered the Census Bureau, which is under the U.S. Department of Commerce, I believe, to come back immediately and do manual counts. Actually have people come there on the weekends, because that was a building where you had a lot of, I call them double shifters. You had nurses and people who worked in places where they worked around the clock and sometimes they weren't home. So they spent the time to make sure those people were counted in that complex. And so because of having had that experience for 90, we knew to intervene before the count was finished in 2010, and it saved us from having a major reduction, because had we missed that, we would have lost a major population, because it's one of the largest housing complexes in the region, Maple Gardens.
So since you brought up housing, here we go. We're in this rabbit hole. Around the world, I'm going to just throw that out there. Everyone is talking about housing and what is affordable. in this ugly word named gentrification. People
Right.
feel they are being pushed out. How impactful was the housing crisis during your tenure, and what did you have to do to try to like balance these two groups of folks?
So yeah, so it's a tremendous challenge, and for mayors who are doing it now, there's even more progressive. So you got to kind of understand what's going on in the region. And you mentioned earlier how does like New York and Pennsylvania. So for New Jersey, the future of New Jersey is the gentrification that's going on in New York. And so let me explain that. And we found out, in fact, I just sold a house in Irvington to a person from Brooklyn because a hardworking middle income person in New York will find it very difficult to buy property in New York City. But when you look at the housing market in New Jersey, it is affordable, and the transportation corridors allow for you to get back to your place of employment in New York. So the future, we knew back in 2002 that part of our marketing plan, if we were going to build areas that had some blight, if we could get some new housing there, that New York would buy them. And they would buy them because they were viewed as affordable. And of course, because we were strategically located, they could get back and forth to their place of employment in New York, because people are not leaving their jobs to come to New Jersey. They're leaving for the housing costs. So for us, that is for most, and still now, a lot of New Yorkers are moving to New Jersey. The first big bust in term boom for a city was Jersey City after the 9/11 crisis. And so the back office companies of these financial firms, they moved to Jersey City because it was so easy for them to come to New York. But now the residents, the workers started to say, hey, our company's located there. Maybe I should live there, and the housing costs are cheaper. So all of these places, Newark, New Jersey, where I do some consulting for some real estate developers about urban markets as well. And we've done some deals in the town where I was mayor. We've done some deals in Newark. Some of them are affordable housing because the city of Newark is aggressive about affordable housing. So for New Jersey, we're in a unique position because of the housing crisis in New York, that you're going to have a major population boom coming over. Now, so one of the challenges for mayors today, and challenges, so you have to have a diverse income in your city for a city to work. You can't have all people who are economically challenged. You can't have all high income people. Yeah, you can, but basically, that's not the American scenario. So you're going to always have some people who are financially challenged. You're going to have some working class people, some middle class people. So to me, the best mix is to have a mix of populations. So home ownership becomes vitally important. So you got to have some housing that's affordable to a working person who can get a mortgage. Some of that also has to look at, how we do credit in this country in terms of what we're going to allow in terms of people entering the housing market. How do we make it easier for them to buy and so forth? So do we give them credit for their rent or all the years they were a renter and all those kinds of things? So that's our current challenge. And, and I think it's our future challenge as well. Where do we do? So now, the question becomes, is there a commitment on the government side to incentivize developers to make it affordable? It's only a couple of ways to do it. So the government has to make a moral decision that housing is close to a right. And we've got to make provisions so if a person can't see where they're going to make money from building the house, they're not going to build it. So that means the government may have to step in with the kinds of incentives for the developer to build low to moderate income housing, but quality housing that lasts a period of time so that people feel comfortable and they're not get short shifted on the kind of housing people are living in. And so, society has to keep an eye on that as we move forward. But you're right, gentrification becomes a major issue. Now, one of the things that happens, and we got to watch this too, if you have blight and abandonment, means people have already left. Do we not have some market housing come back to the community? Because there's nobody living there now, do we continue to have blight? And so that's the push-pull that we as a community has to have. Do we realize it's a mix of incomes that makes a city great? And how do we attract more higher income people to a community without displacing people who have lived there a long, long time? And so that's a push-pull struggle that we have to try to figure out how we do the balancing act so that we're fair to people who have given their sweat and blood and stayed in the community so they can get some new housing opportunities. But we also have to create opportunities for new people who revive the neighborhood, who come back with higher incomes, who are going to maybe bring retail back. Because retailers strictly look at, and you worked in a special improvement district, you know that when retailers look at a neighborhood, they all they want to know is how much do the people make? Not that everybody has to buy, because there's more disposable income in working class neighborhoods. Generally, they dispose of all of it. So that was my pitch. That was my pitch to retailers. I said, I get your fit. I'm not asking you to build a Taj Mahal here, but there are opportunities for retail here that you're just missing.
Mm-hmm. So as we talk about that, what about this cannabis? I was following this cannabis, and New York was waiting on New Jersey, see what New Jersey was going to do, and the impact of licenses or no licenses, or what types of companies New Jersey were going to have that were going to impact New York City's legislation around cannabis, and how to get more Black folks able to secure some of these new opportunities. So if you were mayor, since you're no longer mayor, if you were, what would you advise or suggest around this cannabis industry?
Well, so there's still some points of controversy around cannabis. Let's be clear about that. I'm kind of glad I wasn't. But one of the things, as a private citizen, when the legislation was unrolling, the New Jersey Black Legislative Caucus had a hearing in Elizabeth, and so I decided to put on my civic activism hat and go to the hearing. And I said, listen, wherever you are on the issue, here's just some of my precautions as you move forward. And they were very simple. I was chairing the board of a youth organization that I had grew up in the city of Newark called the International Youth Organization. And some of the young people's challenges were they were already engaged in some what I call antisocial behaviors with marijuana and some with drugs or whatever. So I said, we already have a challenge for getting, and this was a population who had dropped out of high school, we getting in their GEDs, we were trying to get them work ready and helping them get job placement. So as you do your kind of civic work, and I was chairing this board, you got a chance to look at the world kind of in a micro way at this population. And that's a population I think society wants to see advance. So I said, so we have to be careful with this, because we have to explain to young people, just like alcohol, you can't come to work drunk. And so if we're going to have, the legal, I was more for decriminalizing it, because many people's lives have been destroyed for having a small amount of marijuana on them. So, but in any event, they were moving it forward because there's a lot of money involved here, a tremendous amount of money. And so the ethos as the bill moved forward, both in New York and New Jersey, was there were going to be opportunities for African and Latino business owners to participate in the cannabis industry. So in New Jersey, that's not happening. They're beginning to issue some licenses, and the initial licensees, none of them were people of color. The African American Chamber of Commerce president, John Harmon, just did a well-written communication to the community and to policymakers in our state that, hey, what happened to that? Why aren't? And so one of the challenges around that, and New York will be faced with this, and maybe they do it differently from New Jersey, is that they're requiring in New Jersey for you to have your location before you have your license. So that means if you're going to buy a building with the idea that you're going to enter this business and then you don't get the license, what have you done? You've risked your money, you've made this major investment, and you may not get the license. So it's like the chicken or the egg, which comes first? So a lot of minority firms are just not in a position to make that commitment and not know that you're not going to get the license. So whether you rent or you buy to own, you still got to make a financial commitment, and you may have to pay rent even before you get the license. And then if you don't get the license, you're stuck in a lease. So those are some of the challenges minority firms, and we hope that the state policymakers who've made this commitment that people of color were going to be players in this. So New York, hopefully, because they're just rolling out, will learn from the mistakes of New Jersey and deal with those kinds of provisions. Maybe they have a minority fund that actually funds these kinds of challenges for minority firms or smaller firms, whatever you have to do to make sure that people of color have a fair opportunity at participating in this new industry.
So let's switch gears really quickly. Tell me about your firm. What do you do? How, now that you have transitioned out of being mayor for some time now, what are you now doing?
So I represent a whole host of companies. As I mentioned, I do represent some real estate developers who look for opportunities. So sometimes it's a matter of finding that opportunity. Sometimes I just advise them on the community, what they should be doing, what's the state of the government, so forth and so on. I do have one of my I do have a couple of media clients that I represent. One is Local Talk newspaper, where I'm the advertising. Our firm is the advertising director for them, and they're primarily a print and digital newspaper that covers New Jersey, but with a focus on Essex County. And Essex County is where Irvington is located, the city of Newark. It's 21 cities, both urban and suburban in that community. And so Local Talk newspaper. But one of my better projects, where I'm head of governmental affairs, is a magazine called Positive Community. And it's a great magazine. It has a unique marketing approach. It is marketed through African-American churches. At least 300 churches in New York and New Jersey distribute our magazine. It's a Black-owned media, so we're making that pitch during Black History Month. And so if anybody's interested in advertising, both print and media, so it's a whole media company called Positive Community Media, which the magazine is one product. We have an internet radio station called Positive Community Radio, and we're doing a great event based around the Emancipation Proclamation. We call it the Great Emancipation Day, and we're honoring a group of people from New York and New Jersey. Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood, who's a big-time minister and bishop in New York. The mayor of the city of Newark, Raz Baraka. Dr. Ben Chavis, who runs the National Newspaper Association, which is all the Black newspapers in the United States. Ambassador Susan Johnson Cook, and a few other notables. That's on February 19th at the Robert Treat Hotel in Newark. The other, just two other projects I want to mention, but we're a business development firm. We help firms grow. We help through marketing, through government affairs, through community affairs, through public relations, and so forth. So the other group, we're just entering into a new project with Granger Financial, based out of Virginia, which is expanding around the country. They're primarily an insurance organization, and they'll be looking for agents, independent producers in New Jersey and New York, really. But we're having a major event in the city of Newark, and tentatively scheduled for April 2nd. But if anybody's interested in maybe entering the insurance business as maybe a part-time opportunity to make money or whatever, one of the things that we learned from this tragic pandemic is that a lot of our people are underinsured or have no insurance at all. And because of the sudden rush of that, people's families were challenged with trying to bury people, and older people who would let policies lapse and all that kind of thing. So it's always an industry our community should be looking at as well. So they should call Granger Financial. The CEO is Jeff Granger. His number is 973-699-6214 to hear about the upcoming seminar we're doing to recruit people for possible business opportunities, and also those who may want to get their families covered. And the other project I'm working on now is with a company that's in the fashion industry and in the jewelry industry. called Dazzling in Style. And they'll be launching a grand opening in Irvington. We brought them back to my own town at 50 Union Avenue, Suite 501, on the 5th floor. A very fine office building, probably the best office building in Irvington, really nice. The developer did a fantastic job with the building. And that's going to be March 1st. They'll be launching their grand opening. And so we invite people to come, and the owner of that particular business is Tanya Green, and her number is 973-489-5059. And people can reach me at 973-204-5639. My email is Wayne Smith, all lowercase, 442 @gmail. And my website is waynesmith1.com.
And I just want to let the people know, when I reached out to Wayne, he got back to me right away. I was shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, the former mayor got back to me. I couldn't believe it. I was like, oh, what's happening here? But thank you so much for joining today. I really learned a lot more about the role of the mayor, to be quite honest, to taint my expectations a little bit,
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yep. And I look forward to us working on some things together. You know, you're an urban planner, and I was impressed with your background as well. So I think there may be some opportunities that we can collaborate on.
Yes, of course, because it's necessary, you know, and we had this conversation around just urban planners, right? And not a lot of Black people really even know that there's this thing called urban planners and urban studies, and people are designing the very places that we live in and that we touch, we feel, we have conversations around, but we really aren't at the table to really advocate for what we think our communities should have or shouldn't have, or how we think policies impact us. I mean, who knows us better than us, right? We aren't really there because we are placing our efforts in other places, and sometimes the work isn't as sexy or cute. You know, when I told you I was working on this trash, and I was like, oh my gosh, I gotta figure out this rodent problem, you know, like that's not the fun work, but it's definitely something that touches so many people. No one wants to live someplace that's dirty, that has rodents there. But if we aren't going to really try to think about how we're going to fix it, who do we blame?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have to be more engaged. We have to pay attention to these issues. A lot of times they're in those nebulous legal notices about different things, planning board meetings, board of adjustment meetings, community board meetings in New York City. So so people always want to beat up on the mayor and the city council, but there's a whole lot of other people making decisions about your quality of life that you don't pay attention to.
Yes, I just wanted to throw that out there. You are welcome to come back anytime. Let's talk about issues that are coming up. We have a wide range of hosts on this network, Monday through Sunday at various times of the day, and they have different focuses. This is the Blackout Live from New York, where I focus on Black economics, trends in business. You know, we got a lot of Black folks buying up some, not just real estate, but investing in companies that we didn't even get a chance to jump into.
So we have to come back.
We got to come back and talk about that kind of trend in business, and how celebrities and now everyday people can become investors in businesses, and how does that change the wealth gap, if at all. Small businesses that have cropped up during the pandemic, what do they need to do in order to stay viable and sustainable in the communities that they're in? So we got so much to talk about. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm delighted. Looking forward to the future.
And Chap, thank you so much for being my producer for the day, since I was having some challenges getting on. Our host, Chap and Quita, they run something called Share Spaces Mondays at 7 Eastern. So I'm just shouting out his show real quick. But thank you so much, and I will chat with you guys soon.
All right. Bye-bye.